Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Valiant watching the stars through the main window and the empty space around them looked peaceful, but he knew that peace could change in seconds out here in the deep parts of space where humans had built their new homes among distant suns, and Jake had been flying patrol missions for 12 years now, but this sector always felt different. Somehow, like something important had happened here long ago that nobody talked about anymore. The ship moved slowly through the darkness with its engines humming quietly, and the crew worked at their stations, checking sensors and watching for any signs of trouble. Because this was the edge of human space where pirates and smugglers liked to hide, and sometimes worse things showed up from the unknown regions beyond where no human ship had ever returned from, and Jake always felt nervous when they came out this far, even though the Valiant was one of the best ships in the fleet with weapons that could destroy most threats they might face. Lisa Barnes sat at her communications station running her fingers over the control panel as she listened to the radio signals from nearby colonies, and most of it was just normal traffic, like cargo ships reporting their positions and families, sending messages to relatives on other worlds. But sometimes she picked up strange signals that made her wonder what else might be out there in the dark spaces between the stars, and today felt like one of those days when something unusual might happen. Scanner officer called out that he had found something interesting ahead, and Jake walked over to look at the display screen, which showed a small research station floating alone in space with no lights or radio signals coming from it, and the computer said it had been abandoned for many years. But Jake knew they had to check it anyway, because sometimes these old stations had valuable supplies or information that could help the colonies, and sometimes they had other things that were better left alone. Jake ordered the pilot to move closer to the station, and as they got near it, Lisa started picking up a very weak signal that seemed to be coming from deep inside the station itself, and she turned up the power on her equipment and focused all the antennas on the signal, but it was so faint she could barely hear it, and what she could hear made no sense because it sounded like very old Earth language mixed with numbers and codes that she had never seen before. The station looked old and damaged, with holes in its hull and broken solar panels hanging loose in the vacuum, and Jake could see that it had been drifting here for a long time with no one to take care of it. But the signal was definitely coming from inside somewhere, and Lisa said it was getting stronger as they moved closer, which meant there might still be some power running in the computers, or maybe emergency systems that had been waiting all these years for someone to find them. Jake called Dr. Kevin Walsh to the bridge because Kevin knew more about old Earth technology than anyone else on the ship, and when Kevin arrived, he listened to the signal through Lisa's headphones, and his face went pale as he heard what was being transmitted, and he asked Lisa to record everything and run it through the computer translation systems while he tried to figure out what language it was using and where it might have come from. The computer worked for several minutes analyzing the signal, and when the results came up on the screen, Kevin stepped back in shock because the transmission was using encryption codes that had been created on Earth itself during the final years before the planet disappeared, and no one had heard these codes for almost 300 years, and the timestamp on the message showed it had been sent during the last months when Earth was still sending signals to the colonies before everything went quiet forever. Lisa managed to clean up some of the static and decode small parts of the message, and what they could read made Jake feel cold inside, because the words talked about huge enemy fleets moving toward Earth and something called the Devourers that destroyed everything they touched and ate whole worlds, and the message seemed to be a warning sent to all human colonies, telling them to prepare for the worst and to remember something important that Earth had discovered, but the rest was too damaged to understand. Kevin said they needed to board the station and find the original source of the transmission, because there might be more information stored in the computers, and Jake knew it was dangerous to go inside an abandoned station. But the message from Earth was too important to ignore, and he ordered the ship to dock with the station while the crew prepared to explore whatever secrets had been waiting in the darkness for 3 centuries. The airlocks connected with a loud clang that echoed through both ships, and Jake led a small team into the station with their weapons ready and emergency lights shining ahead of them, and the corridors were cold and empty, but the signal was definitely stronger now, and Lisa said It was coming from somewhere deep in the center of the station where the main computers would have been located, and whatever they found there might finally explain what happened to Earth, and why humanity had been fighting for survival ever since. Jake Morrison moved carefully through the dark corridors of the abandoned station, with his team following close behind, and their footsteps echoed strangely in the empty halls where dust floated in the beams of their flashlights and the air felt thick and old, like it had been trapped here for centuries waiting for someone to breathe it again. And Lisa Barnes kept checking her scanner to follow the signal deeper into the station, while Kevin Walsh examined the walls and equipment, looking for clues about what this place had been used. Fourth signal led them to a large room filled with computer terminals and data storage units that looked much more advanced than anything Jake had seen before, and some of the screens were still glowing with a faint blue light that meant power was somehow still running after all these years. And Kevin immediately went to work connecting his portable computer to the main system, while Lisa traced the transmission signal to its source, which seemed to be coming from a sealed chamber at the back of the room. Jake used his security codes to open the chamber door, and inside they found something that made them all stop and stare, because there was a person lying in a cryogenic pod with frost covering the glass and monitors showing that someone was still alive inside, after sleeping for 300 years, and the nameplate on the pod read Dr. Helen Carter, and underneath it said Chief Scientist, Earth Defense Project. And Jake realized they had found someone who might know the truth about what happened to their homeworld. Kevin worked frantically to understand the revival process, while Lisa monitored the life support systems, and Jake stood guard, wondering if they were making a terrible mistake by waking someone who had been sleeping since Earth disappeared. But the signal was definitely coming from Dr. Carter's pod, which meant she had programmed it to call for help when someone finally found her, and that meant she wanted to be awakened and had something important to tell whoever came looking. The revival process took almost an hour, and Jake watched nervously as the pod slowly warmed up and the frost melted away from the glass, and finally Dr. Carter's eyes opened, and she looked around in confusion before focusing on Jake's face and asking in a weak voice where she was and how long she had been sleeping. And when Jake told her it had been almost 300 years since Earth went silent, she closed her eyes and whispered that she had hoped someone would find her before it was too late. Dr. Carter was weak from her long sleep, but she insisted on talking immediately because she said time was running out and the enemy would return soon. And Jake helped her sit up while Kevin and Lisa gathered around to hear what she had to say, and her voice was quiet, but her words were clear as she began to tell them the most terrible story they had ever heard about humanity's final days and the war that destroyed everything they had built. She explained that Earth had detected massive fleets moving through space toward human colonies, and at first they thought it was an alien invasion, but when they captured some of the enemy ships, they discovered something much worse, because the attackers were humans, or had been human once, but they had changed themselves with technology and genetic modifications until they were no longer really people anymore, and they called themselves the Devourers because they consumed everything they conquered. The Devourers had started as a secret research project on a distant colony that was trying to make humans stronger and smarter and able to live forever, but something went wrong, and the enhanced humans lost their ability to feel emotions or care about other people, and they decided that normal humans were weak and needed to be improved or destroyed, and they began attacking colonies and converting the populations into more Devourers who would join their fleets and help them spread across the galaxy. Dr. Carter said that Earth scientists had worked desperately to find a way to stop the Devourers, and they created something called the Genesis Protocol, which was a weapon that could reset all life in the galaxy back to its original state and destroy the Devourers. But using it would mean that all human colonies would lose their advanced technology and memories and would have to start over from the beginning like primitive people on early Earth. The Genesis Protocol was too dangerous to use immediately, so Earth's leaders decided to hide the weapon data in 7 different locations across the galaxy and send out warning messages to all human colonies telling them where to find the information if the Devourers ever returned. And Dr. Carter had volunteered to guard one piece of the data and wait in cryogenic Sleep until someone came looking for answers. She told them that the transmission Jake's ship had detected was actually the second part of a two-part message, and the first part contained coordinates to all 7 hiding places where the Genesis protocol data was stored, and without both parts of the message, the weapon could never be assembled and used, and she feared that the other 6 pieces might have been lost or destroyed during the centuries while she was sleeping. Kevin asked if the Genesis protocol was still necessary after so much time had passed, and Dr. Carter looked at him with sad eyes and said that the Devourers were not truly dead, but only sleeping and waiting for the right time to return, and she had detected signs in the computer data that their fleets were already moving again toward human space, and this time they would be even stronger and more dangerous than before. Lisa checked her communications equipment and confirmed that several distant colonies had gone silent in recent months, and long-range sensors had detected strange energy patterns moving through the outer regions of human space, and Jake realized that Dr. Carter was right and the ancient enemy was returning to finish what they had started 3 centuries ago. When they destroyed Earth, Dr. Carter struggled to her feet and walked to one of the computer terminals, where she began accessing files that had been sealed since Earth's final days, and she showed them star charts with the locations where the other Genesis protocol fragments were hidden, and she said they would need to find all 7 pieces and assemble the weapon quickly because the Devourers were coming, and this time humanity might not survive if they were not prepared to fight back with everything they had. Jake Morrison stood in the briefing room of the USS Valiant looking at the star chart that Dr. Helen Carter had given them, and the 7 locations where the Genesis protocol fragments were hidden looked very far apart across the galaxy, and some of them were in dangerous areas where pirates and hostile aliens controlled the space routes, and Jake knew his crew would have to split up to cover all the locations before the Devourers arrived, and Dr. Carter sat at the table looking much stronger after eating and resting, but Jake could see the worry in her eyes as she explained that each fragment was protected by different security systems that would test anyone who tried to access the data, and some of the tests were designed to make sure that only real humans with good intentions could get the information, because Earth scientists had been afraid that the Devourers might find the fragments. First Lieutenant Ryan Hughes volunteered to take a shuttle with technician Amanda Foster to investigate the closest location, which was an old mining station in the asteroid belt, where one of Earth's research teams had hidden their fragment before the planet fell, and Ryan was a good pilot who could handle the dangerous flight through the rocks, and Amanda knew enough about ancient computer systems to crack whatever security they might find. Meanwhile, Lisa Barnes and engineer Maria Rodriguez would take another shuttle to check a derelict colony ship that had been drifting through space for centuries, and according to Dr. Carter's records, the colonists had received the Genesis protocol data just before their ship lost power and went dark, and they might have stored the fragment in their main computer before they died. Jake decided to take the USS Valiant to investigate a research facility on the edge of human space, while Kevin Walsh and pilot Steve Collins would search for fragments at 2 other locations using the ship's long-range transporters, and they would have to work fast because Dr. Carter's sensors were already detecting energy signatures that looked like Devourer scout ships moving toward human colonies. Ryan Hughes and Amanda Foster launched their shuttle and flew toward the asteroid belt where the mining station was supposed to be located, and Ryan had to use all his flying skills to navigate between the giant rocks while Amanda scanned for any signs of the old facility, and after 3 hours of searching they found it hidden in the shadow of a massive asteroid with no lights or radio signals to give away its position. The mining station looked abandoned and damaged, but when Ryan brought the shuttle close to the docking bay, automatic systems activated and began guiding them in, and Amanda realized that the station had been waiting all these centuries for someone to arrive, and as soon as they docked, the airlock opened and artificial gravity turned on, and lights began glowing in the corridors ahead. They explored the station carefully with their weapons ready because they did not know what security systems might still be active, and eventually they found the main computer room where a holographic message from an Earth scientist appeared and began asking them questions about their identity and their reasons for being there, and Amanda answered honestly that they were looking for the Genesis protocol fragment to fight the Devourers. The hologram seemed satisfied with their answers and led them to a sealed vault where the fragment was stored, but before they could access it, they had to pass a final test that measured their brain patterns and emotional responses to make sure they were still fully human and not Devourer infiltrators in both. Ryan and Amanda passed the test and received the data fragment along with additional information about how the Genesis protocol was supposed to work at the same time. Lisa Barnes and Maria Rodriguez found the derelict colony ship floating in empty space with its hull cracked and its engines cold and dead, and when they boarded the ship they discovered that the colonists had indeed received the Genesis protocol data, but instead of using it they had chosen to hide and hope the Devourers would pass them by, and they had sealed the fragment in their computer core before the ship's life support failed. Lisa and Maria had to work together to restore power to the computer systems, and when they finally accessed the data, they found not only the Genesis protocol fragment, but also personal messages from the colonists explaining why they had chosen to hide rather than fight, and Lisa felt sad reading about families who had hoped their children would survive even if they themselves did not. Back on the USS Valiant, Jake was approaching the research facility that Dr. Carter had marked on her charts, and as they got closer, Kevin Walsh detected strange energy readings that suggested the facility was still active after all these years. And when they arrived, they found a massive space station hidden behind a cloaking device with automated defenses that immediately targeted their ship. Jake tried to communicate with the station and eventually received a response from an artificial intelligence that had been programmed to guard the Genesis protocol fragment, and the AI explained that it would only release the data to someone who could prove they were worthy of wielding such a powerful weapon, and it challenged Jake to a series of tests that would measure his leadership skills and moral character. The tests were difficult and dangerous, and Jake had to make choices about saving his crew versus completing the mission and protecting innocent people versus achieving military objectives. And throughout the test, the AI watched his decisions and measured his responses, and finally it decided that Jake was worthy of the responsibility and gave him the fragment along with warnings about the terrible power of the Genesis protocol. Meanwhile, Steve Collins and Kevin Walsh used the ship's transporters to reach the other two fragment locations, and at each site they encountered different challenges and security systems, but they managed to retrieve both pieces of data and return to the Valiant, where Dr. Carter was already working to assemble the complete Genesis protocol from all the fragments they had gathered. As the crew reunited on the ship, Dr. Carter showed them the completed weapon data and explained that the Genesis protocol was not just a destroyer, but also a creator that could reshape reality itself and reset the development of life across the galaxy. And she warned them that using it would mean giving up everything humanity had built in space and returning to a simpler existence on planets like ancient Earth. But even as she spoke, the ship's sensors detected massive energy signatures approaching from deep space, and Jake realized that the Devourers had finally arrived and were already attacking the outer colonies, and humanity would have to make the terrible choice between using the Genesis protocol and losing their civilization, or facing extinction at the hands of their ancient enemy, who had returned to finish the war they had started 300 years ago. The USS Valiant received emergency signals from colonies across human space, and Jake Morrison stood on the bridge watching the reports come in as one by one the outer settlements went dark and stopped transmitting, and Dr. Helen Carter worked frantically at the science station, analyzing the energy patterns that the ship's long-range sensors were detecting, and she confirmed that the signatures matched the Devourer fleets that had destroyed Earth 3 centuries ago. Lisa Barnes tried to maintain contact with the remaining colonies, but the communications were getting weaker as more relay stations were destroyed or abandoned, and the few messages that got through painted a picture of massive ships appearing without warning and overwhelming planetary defenses before anyone could mount an effective resistance. And Jake realized that humanity was losing the war before it had even begun. Dr. Carter called Jake to the laboratory where she had been working on the Genesis protocol, and she showed him computer simulations of what would happen if they activated the weapon, and the results were both amazing and terrifying because the protocol would indeed destroy every devourer in the galaxy by resetting their enhanced biology back to normal human status, but it would also erase all of human civilization and send every surviving person back to a primitive state. The simulations showed that activating the Genesis protocol would transport all humans to Earth like planets where they would have no memory of space travel or advanced technology, and they would have to rebuild their civilization from the beginning, like their ancestors had done thousands of years ago, and all the colonies and ships and scientific knowledge that humanity had built over centuries would be lost forever. Jake asked if there was any other way to stop the devourers, and Dr. Carter said that Earth scientists had tried everything else before creating the Genesis protocol, and conventional weapons were useless against the devourer ships because their technology was so advanced and their numbers were overwhelming, and the only reason the protocol worked was because it targeted the fundamental forces that held matter together. Kevin Walsh suggested that they might be able to modify the Genesis protocol to be more selective and only affect the devourers while leaving normal humans alone, but Dr. Carter shook her head and explained that the weapon worked by resetting quantum fields across the entire galaxy, and there was no way to make it target only certain types of life, and any attempt to modify it might cause it to fail completely. The ship's navigator, Beth Williams, interrupted them with urgent news because she had been tracking the devourer fleet movements, and she had discovered that they were not just attacking randomly but following a specific pattern that was leading them toward New Terra, which was the capital world of human space, and if New Terra fell, then the government and military command would be destroyed and the remaining colonies would have no way to coordinate their defense. Dr. Carter looked at the navigation charts and her face went pale because she realized that the final Genesis protocol fragment was hidden on New Terra itself, and it had been embedded in the planetary defense grid by refugees from Earth who had managed to escape before the planet was destroyed, and if the devourers captured New Terra they would have access to the complete weapon data and might be able to turn it against humanity. Jake made the decision to head for New Terra immediately because they had to reach the planet before the devourer fleets arrived, and they had to retrieve the final fragment and decide whether to activate the Genesis protocol or find some other way to save humanity, and he ordered the ship to maximum speed while Dr. Carter continued working on possible modifications to the weapon during the journey to New Terra. Dr. Carter made a breakthrough in her research when she realized that the devourers maintained their enhanced abilities through quantum entanglement networks that connected all their minds together in a hive consciousness, and if they could find a way to disrupt those networks, the devourers might lose their coordination and revert to normal humans without needing to reset the entire galaxy. She worked with engineer Frank Garcia to analyze captured devourer technology that human forces had recovered from previous battles, and they discovered that the quantum networks used a specific frequency that could be targeted and disrupted, and Dr. Carter began modifying the Genesis protocol to focus on those frequencies instead of resetting all matter. In the galaxy, meanwhile, the USS Valiant received increasingly desperate messages from New Terra as devourer scout ships began probing the planet's defenses, and Jake could hear the fear in the voices of the military commanders who were trying to evacuate civilians while preparing for a siege that they knew they could not win, and time was running out for humanity's last hope. Lisa Barnes detected strange interference in the communications from New Terra, and when she analyzed the signal patterns, she discovered that some of the transmissions were coming from devourer infiltrators who had somehow gotten past the planetary security and were already working to disable the defense systems from within. And Jake realized that the enemy was even more dangerous than they had thought. As the USS Valiant approached New Terra, Jake could see devourer ships surrounding the planet like a dark cloud, and the space around the world was filled with the wreckage of human defense fleets that had tried to stop the invasion and failed, and Jake knew that his small ship could not fight its way through such a massive enemy force, but they had to try, because the future of humanity depended on reaching the surface. Dr. Carter finished her modifications to the Genesis protocol, and she showed Jake the new targeting system that would focus on the devourer quantum networks instead of resetting all life, and she explained that if it worked, the devourers would lose their hive mind and revert to individual humans who might remember what they had lost and choose to help rebuild instead of destroy, but she also warned that the modified protocol was untested and might not work at all, and they would only get one chance to use it because once the Devourers detected what they were trying to do, they would destroy the weapon and everyone who knew how to build it. And Jake looked at his crew and saw that they were ready to risk everything for the chance to save their species. The USS Valiant began its approach to New Terra while Devourer ships moved to intercept them, and Jake prepared for the battle that would determine whether humanity would survive or join the countless other species that the Devourers had consumed during their long march across the galaxy, and he knew that whatever happened in the next few hours would be remembered forever as either humanity's finest moment or its final defeat. The USS Valiant dove toward New Terra while Devourer ships closed in from all sides, and Weapons Officer Tony Clark worked frantically at his controls targeting the enemy vessels, while defensive systems operator Karen Murphy tried to keep their shields up as energy beams and missiles exploded around them, and Jake Morrison gripped his command chair as the ship shook under the impact of enemy fire that was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The Devourer ships moved with perfect coordination, like a single organism with many parts, and their weapons fired in synchronized patterns that should have destroyed the Valiant immediately. But Tony Clark had studied their attack formations during the approach, and he found tiny gaps in their coordination that allowed him to maneuver the ship through their fire while returning shots that damaged several enemy vessels. Dr. Helen Carter worked in the laboratory with engineer Frank Garcia, making final adjustments to the modified Genesis protocol while the ship rocked around them, and she knew that they would only have minutes to upload the weapon data once they reached New Terra's surface, and she had to make sure every calculation was perfect because there would be no second chance if the modification failed. The planet's surface was covered with explosions and fires as the Devourer ground forces attacked the major cities, and Jake could see that the planetary defense grid was failing as more and more installations went dark, and he realized that they were arriving too late to save most of the population, but they might still be able to prevent the Devourers from spreading to other worlds. Navigator Beth Williams guided the ship through the orbital battle while dodging debris from destroyed human vessels, and she found a clear path down to the government district where the Planetary Defense Command Center was located and where Governor Linda Hayes was supposedly still holding out against the Devourer infiltrators who had been working to sabotage the planet's defenses. From within, the USS Valiant broke through the atmosphere with enemy fighters following close behind, and Tony Clark used the ship's rear weapons to destroy 3 Devourer pursuit craft, while Karen Murphy rerouted power from non-essential systems to keep the shields functioning, and Jake ordered Lisa Barnes to try to contact Governor Hayes directly using emergency command frequencies. Governor Hayes responded immediately, and her voice was strained with exhaustion and fear as she explained that half of her government had been revealed as Devourer agents who had been replaced or converted over the past several months, and the remaining loyal humans were trapped in the command bunker while enemy forces tried to break through the blast doors and capture the planetary defense computers. Jake told Governor Hayes that they needed access to the defense grid to retrieve the final Genesis protocol fragment, and she said that the main access terminal was in the command center, but the Devourer infiltrators were trying to reach it first, and she could not guarantee how much longer her people could hold them off, and Jake realized that his crew would have to fight their way through enemy forces on the ground. The USS Valiant landed in the government plaza, while Devourer ground troops surrounded the area, and Jake led an assault team toward the command bunker while leaving Dr. Carter and Frank Garcia on the ship to continue working on the Genesis protocol. And the fighting in the streets was fierce as Devourer soldiers used advanced weapons and enhanced physical abilities to attack the human defenders. Jake's team fought their way through the government building while Governor Hayes guided them over the communication system, and they could hear explosions and weapon fire coming from the command bunker where the governor's people were making their last stand against the infiltrators. And Jake knew they had to reach the access terminal before the Devourers broke through inside the command bunker. Jake found Governor Hayes and the few remaining loyal government officials defending the main computer terminal and the blast doors. were glowing red-hot from Devourer cutting tools that were almost through the metal, and Jake immediately began downloading the final Genesis protocol fragment while his team set up defensive positions. The Devourer infiltrators broke through just as the download completed, and Jake saw that they looked almost human except for their eyes, which glowed with an unnatural light, and they moved with mechanical precision as they attacked the defenders, and Jake realized that these were people who had once been human but had lost everything that made them individuals. Dr. Carter's voice came over the communication system announcing that she had completed the modified Genesis protocol and was ready to upload it to the planetary defense grid. But she needed Jake to activate the main transmission array and link it to the network that connected all human colonies, and Jake fought his way to the control console while enemy soldiers tried to stop him. Frank Garcia reported from the ship that massive Devourer fleets were arriving in orbit and beginning to attack the remaining human vessels, and the space battle was going badly for humanity because the enemy had too many ships and their technology was superior, and Jake knew that. They had only minutes before the Devourers would destroy everything. Governor Hayes helped Jake access the transmission array, and as soon as the connection was established, Dr. Carter began uploading the modified Genesis protocol to the network, and Jake watched the progress indicator crawl across the screen while Devourer soldiers advanced through the bunker and his ammunition ran low, and he wondered if they would complete the upload before being overwhelmed. The Genesis protocol finished uploading just as the last of Jake's team fell to enemy fire, and Jake activated the transmission sequence that would send the weapon data to every human colony in the galaxy. And then Dr. Carter's voice announced that she was activating the protocol itself, and Jake felt a strange tingling sensation as quantum energy began building up around the planet. The effect was immediate and devastating as Devourer soldiers suddenly stopped attacking and looked around in confusion as their hive mind connection was severed and their enhanced abilities began to fade away, and Jake saw the unnatural light die in their eyes as they remembered who they had been before they were converted, and some of them began to cry as they realized what they had done across the galaxy. The same thing was happening as Devourer fleets lost their coordination and individual ships began drifting aimlessly as their crews recovered their human memories and emotions, and Jake realized that Dr. Carter's modification had worked and the quantum networks that had bound the Devourers together had been destroyed without harming normal humans. But the effort had cost Dr. Carter her life because she had channeled the protocol's energy through her own neural patterns. And when Jake returned to the USS Valiant, he found her collapsed at the laboratory console with a peaceful expression on her face, and Frank Garcia sadly confirmed that she had sacrificed herself to save humanity just as Earth scientists had done 3 centuries ago. Jake Morrison stood in the laboratory of the USS Valiant looking down at Dr. Helen Carter's still form, and he felt a mixture of grief and gratitude because her sacrifice had saved not only humanity but also the millions of converted humans who had been trapped in the Devourer hive mind and were now free to remember who they had been before their transformation. And across the galaxy, former enemy soldiers were laying down their weapons and trying to understand what had happened to them. The reports coming in from human colonies were almost unbelievable, as Devourer fleets that had been attacking just hours before were now sending surrender signals and requesting help for their crews, who were struggling with recovered memories of the terrible things they had been forced to do. And Jake realized that the war was over, but the real work of rebuilding was just beginning. Governor Linda Hayes contacted the USS Valiant from the command bunker on New Terra, and her voice was filled with amazement as she reported that the planet's defenses were secure and the former Devourer infiltrators were cooperating with authorities and providing information about other converted agents throughout human space, and she said that the government was already working on plans to help the recovered humans find new homes and rebuild their lives. Lisa Barnes worked at her communications station coordinating with colonies across the galaxy, and everywhere the story was the same as Devourer forces had simply stopped fighting and their ships were now requesting safe passage to neutral space where they could begin the long process of healing from centuries of forced conversion, and Jake approved several mercy missions to provide medical aid and supplies to former enemy vessels. Engineer Frank Garcia helped Jake prepare Dr. Carter's body for burial, and as they worked, Frank told Jake about the final moments when Dr. Carter had activated the Genesis protocol and how she had smiled as the energy flowed through her because she knew that her long vigil was finally over and that Earth's last gift to humanity had saved them all from extinction. Kevin Walsh spent hours studying Dr. Carter's research notes, and he discovered that she had been working on plans for preventing future conversions and technologies that could detect and reverse the early stages of devourer transformation, and he began organizing teams of scientists to continue her work and make sure that humanity would never again face such a threat. Jake knew that he had to record everything that had happened for future generations, and he sat in his ready room composing a message that would be broadcast to every human world, telling the story of Earth's sacrifice and Dr. Carter's courage and the final victory over the ancient enemy that had threatened to destroy them. In his message, Jake explained how the crew of the USS Valiant had discovered the hidden research station and awakened Dr. Carter from her 300-year sleep, and how she had revealed the truth about the devourers and guided them to the Genesis protocol fragments that Earth scientists had hidden across the galaxy. And he described the terrible choice they had faced between saving humanity and preserving their civilization. He told how Dr. Carter had modified the Genesis protocol to target only the devourer quantum networks, instead of resetting all life in the galaxy, and how her sacrifice had broken the hive mind that had enslaved millions of converted humans and freed them to remember their true nature and choose their own destiny. And he emphasized that the victory belonged not just to his crew but to all the humans who had never given up hope. Jake included the coordinates of the hidden research station and copies of all Dr. Carter's notes so that future scientists could continue her work, and he urged the colonies to remember that their greatest strength was not their technology or weapons but their compassion and determination to protect the innocent and help those in need. The message also contained warnings about other potential threats in the galaxy and advice about maintaining vigilance while working to heal the wounds left by centuries of war. And Jake stressed that humanity had learned that their worst enemy could come from within themselves if they lost sight of what made them human in the first place. As Jake finished recording his message, he received reports that human fleets were regrouping and beginning rescue operations to help former devourer crews, and he felt proud of his species for choosing mercy over revenge, even after suffering so much at their enemies' hands. And he knew that this choice would define humanity's future. Among the stars, the USS Valiant left New Terra orbit with a cargo hold full of former devourer prisoners who had volunteered to help repair the damage they had caused, and Jake watched through the main window as ships from both sides worked together to clear orbital debris and rescue survivors. And he realized that the galaxy would be different now, with millions of recovered humans looking for new purposes. Tony Clark and Karen Murphy worked with former devourer technicians to understand their advanced technology, and they discovered that much of it could be adapted for peaceful purposes, like faster space travel and better medical equipment. And Jake approved sharing this knowledge with all human colonies so that everyone could benefit from the hard-won victory. Navigator Beth Williams plotted courses for the former devourer ships that wanted to establish new colonies far from human space, where they could build communities based on the values they remembered from before their conversion. And Jake provided them with supplies and wishes for peaceful futures, and he hoped that someday humans and the recovered converts could work together as allies. In the weeks that followed, Jake received thousands of messages from across the galaxy thanking his crew for their courage and Dr. Carter for her sacrifice, and many of the messages came from former devourer soldiers who were struggling to forgive themselves for their actions. And Jake always responded that forgiveness was possible and that their choice to help rebuild proved that they had truly regained their humanity. Jake Morrison stood once again on the bridge of the USS Valiant, watching the stars and thinking about Dr. Carter's words that humanity's greatest victory was not in defeating their enemies, but in maintaining their compassion and hope, even in the darkest times. And he knew that as long as humans remembered that lesson, they would never again face the kind of threat that had nearly destroyed Them and the galaxy was safe for future generations who would build something better from the ashes of the old war.